Maggie sold me out for a business deal. I should have known. I was nothing but a stepping stone to her. A convenient tool she used to climb higher in the corporate world. She never loved me. I was just an investment, one she planned to cash out. At the right time. The moment I discovered the truth, I didn't confront her. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just smiled. Because if there's one thing Maggie had underestimated, it was what I could do when I was betrayed. A week ago, Maggie and I were the picture-perfect power couple. She was the CEO of Miller Enterprises, and I was the sole heir of Harrison Corp. Our engagement was all over the business world, two elites uniting, a match made in corporate heaven. That's what the world saw. But behind closed doors, Maggie was distant, cold, calculated. She never let her guard down around me, never whispered sweet nothings. She only smiled in front of the cameras, played the perfect fiancée when needed. I told myself it didn't matter. Love was never part of our deal. But loyalty was. And Maggie? She shattered that loyalty the moment. She betrayed me. It happened 3 days ago. I was in my office when I received a confidential report. One of my board members, Donald, had met with Maggie in secret. At first I thought it was just business. But then I saw the contract. Maggie had sabotaged a billion-dollar merger I had been working on for months. She had exploited the deal's weakest point, leaked insider details to our rival firm, and orchestrated a takeover, all to cut me out, to destroy my company, to prove she didn't need me. I stared at the documents in silence, my pulse steady. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was an execution. She wanted me gone before I even saw the knife. Too bad for her. I had already felt it. I took a deep breath, leaned back in my chair, and smirked. If Maggie thought she could destroy me for a business deal, she had no idea what real destruction looked like. Because now, I wasn't just going to ruin the deal. I was going to bring down her entire company. She wanted a war? She just declared one. I wasn't born into power, I built it. While other wealthy heirs wasted their days partying and throwing around their last names like golden tickets, I was in boardrooms, sharpening my mind, playing chess in a world where one wrong move meant destruction. At 23, I took over Harrison Corp. My father built it from the ground up, and I expanded it into an empire. I wasn't ruthless. I was strategic. I didn't make enemies. I buried them before they could become one. But Maggie was different. We met at a business summit 3 years ago. She wasn't just another spoiled rich girl with a silver spoon in her mouth. She was ruthless, brilliant, and dangerously ambitious. She was beautiful too. The kind of beauty that made men foolish, but I wasn't a fool, and neither was she. Maggie knew how to play the game. She walked into a room and owned it. CEOs twice her age respected her, feared her, and yet never saw her coming until it was too late. She knew what she wanted, and she always got it. When she looked at me across the negotiation table that first night, I saw it in her eyes. She wanted me, not for love, not for romance, for power. She wanted a partnership, a deal, and I gave it to her. We started as business allies. Her company, Miller Enterprises, was rising fast, but she needed backing, connections, and influence. I had all three. In return, she was my edge, my equal. A woman who didn't fear the battlefield but thrived in it. When we announced our engagement, Last year, it sent waves through the corporate world. The Harrison-Miller merger would be unshakable. Investors doubled down. Stocks skyrocketed. Everyone thought we were a power couple destined to dominate. But there was one problem. Maggie didn't love me, and I didn't love her either. Love wasn't the foundation of our relationship. Control was. We both wanted to be the one holding the strings. Maggie, with her cold perfection, thought she could keep me at arm's length forever. She never showed me weakness. Never let her mask slip. But I saw through her. I knew her well enough to read what she feared most. She was terrified of being powerless. That's why she worked harder than anyone else. That's why she never let herself be vulnerable. She thought she could outplay me, but Maggie forgot one thing. I had never lost. Then she betrayed me. I shouldn't have been surprised. Maggie was raised by a father who taught her that emotions made you weak. That power was the only thing worth chasing. She was trained to win at all costs, even if it meant burning the people closest to her. But she made a mistake. She thought I wouldn't burn her back. The moment I saw the contract, the one she had signed, behind my back, I knew this was war. She had joined forces with my enemy, Donald. A man I once called my closest friend. The same man who had stood beside me for years, shaking my hand, all while plotting to stab me in the back. Together, they thought they could push me out of my own company. They thought I'd be too blind, too trusting, too in love to see it coming. That was their first mistake. Their second? Underestimating how far I'd go to destroy them. When I met Maggie later that night, she was completely unaware that I knew. She walked into our penthouse, kicked off her heels, and poured herself a glass of wine like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just signed away my future for her own gain. She turned to me with that same poised smile. "Long day?" she asked, her voice smooth, effortless. I stared at her, taking in the woman I had once respected, once trusted, once thought of as my equal. But now she was nothing more than a target. I walked toward her, took the glass from her, hand, and swirled the wine slowly. Then, with deliberate ease, I tipped it over. Let the deep red liquid spill onto the floor between us. A stain. Just like her betrayal. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker in her eyes. Good. She should be scared, because I was about to take everything from her. Everything she built, everything she fought for, every single thing she valued. I would rip it away. Maggie thought she had played the game well, but she forgot one thing. I don't lose. Maggie didn't flinch. Even as the wine dripped onto the floor, staining the marble beneath us, she remained perfectly composed. That was Maggie, always in control. But tonight, I saw it. The flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, the way her fingers curled slightly, gripping the edge of the counter. She knew, somewhere deep inside, she knew I had found out. But Maggie was too smart to panic, too calculating to confess. Instead, she sighed, picked up a napkin, and dabbed at the spill with a casualness that made my blood boil. "What's wrong, Jeff?" she asked, her voice smooth. Too smooth. I studied her, how effortlessly she lied with her body language, how she looked at me with mild amusement, like I was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. She was testing me, waiting to see if I had figured it out, if I would confront her, if I would break first. I didn't. I stepped closer, just enough to watch her pupils dilate, a reaction she couldn't control. "You tell me, Maggie," I said, my voice calm, dangerously calm. Her lips twitched, just a flicker, a movement so small anyone else would have missed it, but I didn't, because I had spent years studying her, every habit, every tell. Every moment where the mask slipped for just a second, and in that second, I knew. She wasn't surprised, she was calculating, already deciding her next move. "Is this about work?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. She played the concerned fiancée, so effortlessly it would have been Oscar-worthy. If I hadn't been the one she was trying to con, I didn't answer. Instead, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and slid it across the counter. The contract, the proof of her betrayal. Her name, Maggie Miller, signed, dated, stamped in ink like a death sentence. Her lips parted just slightly, just enough to show the first crack in her mask. Then, like a switch had flipped, she smiled. "You really think this is betrayal?" she said, her voice so smooth it was almost convincing. Almost. I stared at her, waiting. She was buying time, scrambling for an excuse. "It's business, Jeff," she continued, her tone light, dismissive. "Nothing personal. That was it. That was her excuse." I let out a slow breath. Nothing personal. The words rang in my head like an execution bell. She had just admitted it, not with guilt. Not with regret, with indifference, like I was nothing, like I had never meant anything. And suddenly, the reality hit me. Maggie wasn't the woman I thought she was. She wasn't just ambitious, she was empty. A woman who had spent her entire life climbing, using, taking, until there was nothing left but power. And I had been her greatest asset, until now. Until she decided I wasn't useful anymore. Until she tried to erase me. I stepped back. "You planned this," I said, not a question. "A statement." Maggie tilted her head, then shrugged. "You always knew what kind of person I was, Jeff." She smiled then, small, sharp, victorious, like she had already won, like she thought this was over. I almost laughed, because if Maggie thought I was the kind of man who would just accept defeat, she had made a very, very big mistake. I grabbed my phone, took one last look at the woman who had shattered my trust, my loyalty, my patience. Then I turned away. I walked to the door. She didn't stop me, because she still thought she had the upper hand. She thought I would sulk. Maybe even get drunk for a few nights, curse her name, then move on. She thought I would accept the loss. She was wrong, because Maggie didn't realize I wasn't walking away. I was getting ready to burn her entire world to the ground. I didn't sleep that night, not because of heartbreak. There was nothing left to break. Not because of anger. Anger was too weak of a word for what I felt. I sat in my penthouse, staring at the skyline of the city I had helped shape, the empire I had built with my own hands. And now Maggie wanted to take it from me. No, not take, erase. She didn't want my company. She wanted me gone, cut out like a bad investment. I had spent years watching her, studying her, learning how she moved, how she thought, how she played the game. But now I realized she had been doing the same to me. Maggie had never loved me. She had never respected me. She had only tolerated me because I was useful. Now I wasn't. And, in her world, the useless get discarded. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. The weight of betrayal settled deep in my chest, not like a wound, but like a fire, burning, growing, ready to consume. Because if Maggie thought I would go, quietly, she was wrong. By morning, I had gone through every detail of the deal, every contract she signed, every email she sent, every meeting she had in secret with Donald. She thought she had covered her tracks well, but I wasn't just anyone. I wasn't some rich fool who fell in love and let his guard down. I was Jeff Harrison, and I didn't lose. I clenched my jaw as I scanned through the reports my private team had gathered overnight. Maggie had been planning this for months. She had slowly positioned herself, gained allies, set the board perfectly. She had been waiting for the right moment to strike. And yet, something didn't add up. I scrolled back to a document from last month, a note from one of my sources, a conversation Maggie had with an unknown investor. The words were vague, but there was something hidden beneath them. I could feel it. Like there was a bigger piece I hadn't seen yet, something deeper, something personal. I frowned. Maggie was ruthless, yes, cold, yes, but calculated. If she wanted power, she could have just negotiated for a bigger stake. She didn't have to ruin me completely unless this wasn't just about business. I inhaled sharply. Had I made a mistake? Had I miscalculated something? Was there more to this betrayal than just ambition? I stood abruptly, my pulse steady but my mind racing. I wasn't just fighting for my company anymore. I was fighting to uncover the truth, and no matter what it took, I was going to get it. I had thought Maggie's betrayal was about power. I had thought this was just a business war, a battle of dominance between two elites. Was wrong. There was something deeper, something I hadn't seen, and I realized it the moment I found the hidden clause in the contract. It was buried under pages of legal jargon, disguised as a minor conflict resolution clause. But when I dug deeper, I found the real purpose behind it. If Harrison Corp collapsed or withdrew from the merger, Miller Enterprises would receive full ownership of all shared assets. That wasn't just a power move. That was an execution plan. Maggie wasn't trying to push me out of the company. She was trying to eliminate me entirely. Every trace of my business, every investment I had made in our partnership, every connection I had helped her secure. She wasn't just moving forward without me. She was making sure I couldn't recover. This wasn't ambition. This was personal. But why? I sat in my office, tapping my fingers against the polished surface of my desk. I needed answers, and I needed them now. So, I made a call, not to a lawyer, not to an investor, to Lisa, Maggie's closest friend, and the only person who knew the truth. Maggie would never admit. Lisa hesitated when she met me at the private lounge. She wasn't the type to betray Maggie easily, but when I slid the contract across the table, her face paled. She stared at it for a long moment before exhaling sharply. "You weren't supposed to find out." I tilted my head slightly. "Find out what?" Lisa hesitated again. Then, finally, she leaned forward. "Jeff, Maggie didn't betray you because of business. My jaw tightened. Then why? Lisa closed her eyes for a moment, as if weighing the cost of what she was about to say. When she finally spoke, her words changed everything, because she was trying to protect you. I stilled. For the first time in years, I felt something close to shock. Maggie, the same woman who had signed my downfall in ink, the woman who had gone behind my back, she had done it to protect me? I almost laughed. You expect me to believe that? I said, my voice sharp. Lisa met my gaze. Believe what you want. But the deal with Donald, the betrayal, it wasn't about power. It was about you. Explain. My patience was razor thin. Lisa sighed, rubbing her temple. Donald isn't just after your company, Jeff. He's after you. And Maggie knew that if you went forward with your merger, you'd be walking into a trap. The air in the room turned suffocatingly still. Lisa continued, her voice lower now. Donald didn't just want to take over Harrison Corp. He wanted to ruin you completely. Maggie knew that. So she made a deal. She'd sabotage your merger in exchange for keeping you alive. I froze. Lisa's eyes darkened. She didn't do it to win, Jeff. She did it to save you. I clenched my fists under the table. I had spent days planning her destruction. I had sworn to ruin everything she had built. But now everything had changed. Maggie hadn't betrayed me for herself. She had betrayed me because she believed it was the only way to protect me, and suddenly, I wasn't sure who the real enemy was anymore. I left the meeting with Lisa, my mind in chaos. For days, I had burned with vengeance. For days, I had planned Maggie's downfall with precision, and now, none of it made sense. If Lisa was telling the truth, if Maggie's betrayal wasn't about ambition, but about protecting me, then everything I thought I knew was wrong, and I needed answers. Now, I stormed into Maggie's office without warning. Her assistant tried to stop me. She failed. Maggie was on a call, standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, her posture perfectly composed as always. But when she turned and saw me, something flashed in her eyes. Not fear, not anger, but resignation, like she had been waiting for. This moment, I didn't give her time to react. I grabbed the contract from my pocket, slammed it onto her desk, and leveled my gaze at her. Tell me the truth. Her expression remained unreadable. What truth? She asked, her tone deceptively calm. Took a step closer. Lisa told me everything. For the first time, her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the desk. A tell, a sign of cracks forming in her composure. She told me why you did it, I continued, voice low but sharp. Why you signed the deal, why you handed Donald everything, on a silver platter. Maggie didn't blink. And you believed her? I studied her face carefully. Is she lying? A pause. Then, slowly, Maggie exhaled. And when she spoke, her voice was quiet. No. The word cut through me like a blade. I clenched my jaw. So you admit it. Maggie finally looked up, her eyes locking onto mine. Yes. My breath came slow and steady, but inside, a storm raged. For weeks I had pictured this moment so differently. I had imagined her cold, cruel, victorious. I had imagined myself watching her world burn as revenge. But now, Now I felt nothing but a hollow, bitter kind of fury. Why didn't you tell me? My voice was sharp, controlled. Maggie let out a quiet laugh, one with no humor. And what would you have done, Jeff? She asked, tilting her head. Listened to me? Trusted me? I didn't answer. Because we both knew the truth. I wouldn't have believed her. I would have thought it was a manipulation tactic. And she knew that. That was why she had made the deal with Donald instead. That was why she had let me hate her. Because it was the only way to protect me. A sharp, bitter taste settled in my mouth. I spent the last week planning your downfall. I admitted. Maggie didn't even flinch. I know. And you let me? Yes. That single word hit harder than anything else. She had known. She had known I would come for her. She had known I would destroy everything she built. And yet she let it happen. Because to her, as long as I was safe, she didn't care about the cost. I stepped closer, close enough to hear the quiet hitch in her breath. You should have told me. Maggie's eyes flickered with something painful. Would it have changed anything? She asked softly. I opened my mouth, stopped, because no, it wouldn't have. We both knew that. The moment she betrayed me, there was no coming back. We were standing on opposite sides of a war, and neither of us had won. We had both lost. Maggie turned away, looking back out at the city below. It's over now, she murmured. Donald got what he wanted. You're still standing. That's all that matters. I stared at her. This woman, this brilliant, ruthless, complicated woman who had spent her whole life fighting for survival. I had spent years thinking I knew her, but I had never really seen her until now, and for the first time since this war began. I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty, because now I finally understood. Maggie never wanted to win. She just wanted to make sure I didn't lose. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The city stretched beneath us, lights flickering in the distance, life moving on, unbothered by the war we had waged against each other. I had come here to end this, to destroy Maggie, to watch her fall the same way she had tried to make me fall. But now, I couldn't. Not because I forgave her, not because the damage could be undone, but because revenge felt hollow when I finally knew the truth. Donald thinks he won, I said finally. Maggie let out a soft breath. Let him. I studied her. She looked tired, not from defeat, but from everything, from years of fighting, years of surviving, from playing the ruthless CEO, the untouchable businesswoman, the woman who never loses. You gave up everything for me, I murmured. Her lips twitched, almost in amusement. Not everything, she said. I still have my company. I still have my name. But we both knew how fragile that was now. Maggie was powerful. But even she had limits. Donald had crippled her business. She had no allies left, no investors willing to bet on a CEO who had just suffered the biggest corporate backstab of the decade. She was standing on the edge of a fall, one small push. And she would lose everything, and I had the power to push. So what now? I asked. Maggie turned back to me, her gaze unreadable. Now? She echoed. Now, you get your revenge. Isn't that what you wanted? I clenched my jaw. Yes, it was what I wanted. For weeks, I had dreamed of this moment, the moment where she had nothing left, and I had the power to crush her completely. But now, standing in front of her, I realized something. I didn't want revenge. I wanted something else, something I couldn't name. "You're not going to fight back?" I asked, studying her carefully. Maggie lifted a brow. "Should I?" she asked. "I already lost, Jeff. You won." The words didn't feel like a victory. I let out a slow breath. "I'm not going to destroy you, Maggie." She went still, not in shock, not in relief, just processing. "Why?" she finally asked. I could have told her the truth. That revenge meant nothing. If I wasn't the same person by the end of it, that after everything, I still respected her, that some part of me would never be able to truly hate her. But I didn't. Instead, I said the only thing that mattered. Because I don't lose. Maggie exhaled softly. Then, for the first time since I walked into this office, she smiled. Not a cold, calculating smile, not a victory smile, but something smaller, something real. I walked toward the door, my decision final. Maggie wouldn't fall, not by my hands, not today. She would have to pick up what was left and rebuild from scratch. That was punishment enough. I had taken everything back, but I had also given her a chance to rise again, and knowing Maggie, she would. As I reached for the handle, I heard her voice, quiet but certain. "Goodbye, Jeff." I paused for a fraction of a second. Then, without turning back, I said, "Goodbye, Maggie." And just like that, it was over. 6 months later, the headlines. Came first, Donald Weston, under investigation for corporate fraud. Harrison Corp stocks skyrocket after new partnership deal. And then, Miller Enterprises back from the brink? Maggie Miller strikes new international deal. I read each headline in silence, seated in my office, a glass of whiskey in hand. Donald had played his game too aggressively. It had caught up to him. And Maggie was still standing. She had survived, like I knew she would, like I knew she always would. That night, as I stepped onto the rooftop of my penthouse, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I stared at the screen for a moment, debating whether to answer. Then, slowly, I picked up. Silence filled the line at first. Then, "Jeff." Her voice was calm, steady, just like I remembered. "Maggie." Another pause. Then, "Happy New Year." I exhaled, a small smirk tugging at my lips. "Happy New Year, Maggie." She didn't say anything after that. She didn't have to. The call disconnected. A moment later, and as I stared at the city below, I realized some wars don't end with winners. Some wars end with survivors, and we had both survived.